Have you ever noticed how two people can face the same situation and walk away with completely different outcomes? One feels defeated before they even begin, while the other somehow finds strength, confidence, and hope. It raises a fascinating question: what creates that difference? For many people, life feels weighed down by doubt, worry, and a quiet sense that they're not quite capable enough. But what if the real turning point isn't circumstances at all, but the way we think about ourselves? There's a quiet struggle that many people carry through life, and often no one around them even notices it. On the outside, they may appear capable, educated, even successful. But inside, something keeps whispering the same discouraging message: you're not good enough. You're not strong enough. You can't really do it. That voice, soft but persistent, has a way of draining energy from a person before they even begin. It's the feeling of inferiority, and for countless people, it quietly shapes the direction of their lives. Not long after delivering a speech one evening about the importance of positive thinking, a man approached with an expression that was almost painful to see. He asked if he could talk privately about something that felt, in his words, desperately important. They stepped backstage and sat down together, and the man began explaining the situation that was weighing heavily on his mind. He had come to town, he said, to handle what might be the most important business deal of his entire career. The opportunity was enormous. If he succeeded, it could change everything for him. But there was a problem. He didn't believe he could do it. The words came out slowly at first, then more quickly, as if years of frustration were suddenly spilling out. He said he felt discouraged, almost defeated before the meeting had even happened. For as long as he could remember, he had been haunted by feelings of inferiority. Every challenge seemed to awaken the same old doubt. And now, standing on the edge of this major opportunity, that doubt had grown so strong that he felt as if he were already sinking. He had listened carefully to the talk earlier that evening, and something in it stirred a small spark of hope. So he asked a simple question, one that millions of people silently ask themselves every day. How do you get faith in yourself? The answer wasn't complicated, but it was honest. First, it was explained that such feelings usually don't appear out of nowhere. They come from somewhere, often from earlier experiences, from childhood impressions, from things said or done long ago that quietly shape the way a person sees themselves. Discovering those roots can take time, and sometimes careful reflection or guidance is needed to fully understand them. But the man had a problem right now. The meeting that could change his future was just ahead. He needed something immediate, something practical that could help him face the moment with strength rather than fear. So he was given a simple mental exercise. As he walked through the streets that evening, he was told to repeat a short affirmation again and again, to say the words slowly with belief, and especially before the important meeting the next day. The words were simple: I can do all things through Christ, which strengthens me. It was a line drawn from the Bible, but the power of it lay in the idea behind it. Instead of rehearsing thoughts of failure, he would begin filling his mind with a statement of strength. The instruction was clear: repeat the words with faith. Let them replace the thoughts that had been weakening him. The man stood quietly for a moment after hearing the suggestion. Something about the idea seemed to touch him deeply. Then he straightened his shoulders, thanked the speaker with genuine feeling, and walked out. As he left, his posture looked different, still uncertain perhaps, but no longer defeated. It was as if the very act of believing even slightly had already begun changing his mindset. Later, he reported something remarkable. That simple affirmation had worked wonders for him. He found it almost unbelievable that repeating a short line could shift his thinking so dramatically. Yet it had. The words had interrupted the endless stream of doubt that had been running through his mind. Instead of feeding insecurity, he had begun feeding confidence. And once the mind begins moving in that direction, something powerful happens. The entire personality begins to respond. This story might sound unusual at first, but the deeper issue behind it is incredibly common. An astonishing number of people walk through life carrying the same quiet burden this man described: inferiority, self-doubt, a persistent sense that somehow they fall short. What's striking is how often these feelings trace back to the earliest years of life. Childhood experiences have a powerful way of shaping how we see ourselves. A remark made casually by a parent, a comparison between siblings, a teacher's criticism, a repeated reminder that someone else seems smarter, stronger, or more talented. None of these moments may seem dramatic on their own, but together over time they can build a quiet belief deep inside a person's mind. Maybe I'm just not as capable as others. Once that belief settles in, it begins influencing everything. A person may hesitate to take opportunities. They may avoid challenges that could reveal their potential. They may hold themselves back long before the world ever has the chance to do it. The strange part is that the limitations often exist only in the mind. To illustrate how easily these feelings can develop, the author once shared a story from his own childhood, one that might seem almost humorous today, but at the time felt deeply serious. As a boy, he was extremely thin. Not weak, not unhealthy, just painfully skinny. In fact, he had plenty of energy. He ran track, stayed active, and was physically strong. But none of that seemed to matter in his mind. All he could think about was how thin he looked. It bothered him constantly. He didn't want to be thin. He wanted to be solid, strong, impressive, what he imagined a tough, confident person should look like. So he began trying everything he could think of to gain weight. He drank cod liver oil. He consumed milkshakes in heroic quantities, chocolate sundaes, cakes, pies, anything that promised to add pounds. But nothing worked. He stayed thin, and night after night he lay awake worrying about it. It might sound like a small concern now, but for a young mind trying to figure out its place in the world, it felt enormous. That one physical characteristic became a source of constant self-consciousness. Years later, something unexpected happened. Around the age of 30, he suddenly gained weight rapidly. In fact, he gained so much that he eventually had to lose 40 pounds just to return to a healthy size. The irony of the whole situation became obvious. He had spent years worrying about being too thin, only to later worry about being too heavy. Looking back, it revealed something important about insecurity. Often, the problem isn't the condition itself. It's the way the mind interprets it. And there was another source of pressure in his early life as well. Nearly every member of his family was a public speaker. That might sound impressive, but for him, it was terrifying. He had no desire to stand in front of people and speak. The idea filled him with dread. Yet family members often encouraged or pushed him to do exactly that. Imagine being a shy young person already unsure of yourself, suddenly placed in situations that feel overwhelming. The result was predictable: fear, self-consciousness. And once again, the quiet thought, maybe I'm not capable. To overcome that fear required a deliberate effort to build confidence step by step. He had to learn to develop faith in the abilities he had been given, even when those abilities felt uncertain. And the method he discovered was surprisingly simple. Fill the mind with thoughts of faith instead of thoughts of inadequacy. Over time, that shift begins to release hidden strengths that were always there, waiting behind the barrier of doubt. The idea may sound straightforward, but its implications are enormous. Because inferiority is not just an emotional discomfort. It acts like a barrier inside the personality. It blocks the flow of creativity, courage, and initiative. When a person believes they are inadequate, they unconsciously limit themselves. They hesitate to try, or they approach challenges with so much fear that their performance weakens before they even begin. But when confidence begins to grow even a little, the opposite happens. Energy increases. Initiative returns. The mind becomes willing to experiment, to learn to attempt things that once felt impossible. Think for a moment about how often comparisons shape our self-image. Perhaps someone grows up with an older sibling who seems brilliant in school, earning top grades and praise from teachers. Meanwhile, the younger child struggles, bringing home average marks. The message that slowly forms in the younger child's mind might sound something like this: he gets A's, I get C's. He's the successful one, I'm not. Over time, that quiet conclusion can become a permanent label in the mind. But the truth is far more complicated. Academic performance, while valuable, does not determine the full measure of a person's potential. History is filled with individuals who performed modestly in school, but later excelled in the real challenges of life. Yet the early comparison lingers, and if it is never challenged, it can quietly shape a lifetime of self-doubt. This is why replacing those old mental patterns is so important. Confidence does not grow by accident. It grows through deliberate thought habits. When a person begins suggesting positive ideas to their own mind, ideas of strength, capability, and faith, something remarkable begins to happen. The subconscious mind starts accepting those ideas as possible truths. Gradually, behavior changes to match them. A person stands a little taller. They approach situations with more calm. They speak and act with greater assurance, and often the results follow. The essential secret is simple. The mind tends to move in the direction of the thoughts it repeatedly entertains. Fill it with doubt, and doubt expands. Fill it with confidence, and confidence grows. This is why affirmations, short, powerful statements repeated with belief, can be surprisingly effective. They interrupt the old mental record that keeps replaying failure and replace it with something stronger. The businessman who feared he would fail in his important deal did not change his external circumstances overnight. What changed first was the atmosphere inside his mind. He replaced the sentence, "I can't do this," with, "I can do all things through the strength given to me." Once that shift happened, his behavior followed. And that is often where transformation begins. The truth is that many people underestimate their own abilities simply because they have rehearsed negative ideas about themselves for years. Those ideas can be challenged. They can be replaced. And when they are something powerful, begins to emerge an inner confidence that was always present, quietly waiting to be released. Believing in yourself in that sense is not arrogance. It is recognizing that the abilities placed within you are real, and that when supported by faith and strengthened by positive thinking, they can carry you far beyond the limits you once imagined. One morning in a hotel dining room, two men sat down at breakfast and began talking about how their night had gone. It was the sort of casual conversation people have every day, the kind that begins with simple questions and small observations. But what emerged from that exchange revealed something surprisingly profound about the way our thoughts shape our energy, our health, and even our ability to move through life with strength. The first man looked tired. Not just a little tired, but the kind of tired that comes from a night spent wrestling with your own thoughts. He admitted that he had slept terribly. He had tossed and turned for hours and woke up feeling just as exhausted as when he first lay down. He shook his head and said something that many people might recognize from their own lives. "I guess I ought to stop watching the news before going to bed," he said. "I listened to it last night and filled my head with nothing but trouble." The second man sitting nearby overheard the remark and joined the conversation. His experience had been completely different. "I had a wonderful night," he said calmly. "Of course I used my go-to-sleep plan. It never fails." Naturally, that sparked curiosity. What kind of plan could guarantee a good night's rest? So he explained. When he was a boy, his father had a habit that shaped the evenings in their home. Every night, just before bedtime, the family would gather together in the parlor. His father would read a passage from the Bible. Then they would say their prayers. After that, the children would go upstairs to bed. And he remembered that when he lay down at night after those quiet moments of reflection, he slept peacefully. The mind had been settled. The day had been closed gently. There was no agitation, no lingering anxiety, just a calm sense that everything was in order. But as the years passed and he left home, he drifted away from that simple habit. Life became busy. Prayer became rare, reserved mostly for moments when something had gone wrong. Eventually, he and his wife found themselves facing a series of difficult problems. And during that time, they decided to try returning to the old practice. Each night before bed, they began reading from the Bible together and offering a quiet prayer. Something remarkable happened. Peace returned. He admitted he couldn't fully explain why it worked so well, but he knew the result. His sleep improved dramatically. His mind stopped churning through worries at night. Even when he traveled, he continued the same habit, reading something peaceful before bed and taking a moment to pray. The night before that breakfast conversation, he said he had read the 23rd Psalm aloud. He looked across the table at the tired man and made a simple observation. "I didn't go to bed with my mind full of trouble," he said. "I went to bed with my mind full of peace." Those two phrases say a great deal about the human experience. A mind full of trouble. A mind full of peace. Every person lives somewhere between those two conditions. And the surprising truth is that the difference often begins with the thoughts we allow to occupy our minds. Many people assume that peace is something that happens to us only when our circumstances improve, when problems disappear, when pressure fades, when life finally settles down. But that idea reverses the order of things. More often, peace begins with a change in the way we think, and once that shift happens, our entire experience of life begins to change along with it. The essence of the secret lies in learning to live on a different thought basis. That may sound difficult at first. Changing one's thinking requires effort, and habits of worry or tension often feel deeply ingrained. But the truth is that continuing to live in a constant state of strain is far more exhausting than learning to cultivate peace. A life filled with mental tension is incredibly hard to maintain. Every challenge becomes heavier. Every difficulty drains energy. The mind becomes a battlefield of anxieties, but a life guided by inner peace moves differently. When the mind becomes calm, the personality begins to function smoothly. Decisions become clearer. Emotions stabilize. Strength returns. In a very real sense, peace generates power. One physician once explained this idea in a way that stayed with many people who heard it. He said that a large number of his patients came to him believing something was physically wrong with them. They felt tired, anxious, unsettled. Yet after examination, he discovered that in many cases, nothing was physically wrong at all. The real problem lay in their thoughts. So he developed an unusual prescription. Instead of giving medication, he would tell certain patients to look up a specific verse in the Bible. He deliberately refused to write the verse down for them. He wanted them to open the book themselves and read it with attention. The verse came from a passage that says, "Be transformed by the renewing of your mind." That phrase contains an enormous idea: renewing the mind. Not merely adjusting a few thoughts here and there, but transforming the entire mental atmosphere in which a person lives. To renew the mind means deliberately changing the kind of thoughts that occupy it. And one of the most effective ways to begin is surprisingly simple. Empty the mind. At least twice a day, make a conscious effort to clear out the thoughts that disturb peace. Fear, resentment, insecurity, regret, guilt. These emotions accumulate quietly if they are never released. When they build up over time, they create a heavy mental atmosphere that drains energy and clouds judgment. So the practice begins by deliberately letting those thoughts go. Imagine emptying them from the mind the same way you might open a window and allow stale air to escape from a room. But there is an important second step. Once the mind is emptied of destructive thoughts, it must be filled again, this time with creative and healthy ones. If the mind is left empty, old worries quickly return. So the new mental space must be occupied by ideas that strengthen and calm the personality. Peaceful imagery can be surprisingly powerful in this process. For example, picture the silvery light of the moon reflecting gently on moving water. Or imagine the quiet rhythm of waves washing softly onto a sandy shore. Allow those images to pass slowly through the mind. Such mental pictures have a quiet healing effect. They relax tension in the same way that listening to gentle music might calm a restless mood. Words can also influence the mind in remarkable ways. Certain words carry deep emotional associations. When spoken slowly and thoughtfully, they can shape the atmosphere of the mind. Take a word like serenity. Say it quietly. Picture what it represents. Repeat it slowly. Let the meaning settle into your thoughts. Words like that can function almost like medicine for the mind. They carry suggestions of calmness that gradually replace agitation. Some people find it helpful to memorize short passages from poetry or scripture that express peaceful ideas. One man developed an interesting habit. Whenever he came across a sentence that expressed calmness or faith, he wrote it down on a small card. He carried these cards with him and reviewed them throughout the day until the words became part of his thinking. Over time, he discovered that these peaceful ideas had begun quietly reshaping his mental habits. He once shared a quotation that had influenced him deeply. It came from a 16th century mystic and contained a simple but powerful message. Let nothing disturb you. Let nothing frighten you. Everything passes away except God. God alone is sufficient. Statements like that, when absorbed slowly and repeatedly, begin to change the emotional climate of the mind. Peace becomes more natural. Calm thinking replaces agitation. And from that calmness, new strength begins to grow. Another practical method for cultivating peace involves the way we speak with others. Conversation has a powerful influence on mental atmosphere. When people gather together and begin discussing problems, frustrations, or fears, the tone of the entire conversation can quickly become tense. In those moments, a person who introduces calm and hopeful ideas can subtly shift the emotional direction of the group. Instead of adding more agitation to the discussion, they introduce balance. Peaceful thinking spreads surprisingly quickly when someone takes the initiative to guide conversation toward constructive ideas. But perhaps one of the most powerful techniques for cultivating peace is something very simple and very ancient: silence. In a world filled with constant activity and noise, silence is often neglected. Yet the mind needs periods of quiet in the same way the body needs rest. Setting aside 15 minutes each day for complete silence can have a remarkable effect. Find a quiet place where you will not be disturbed. Sit comfortably or lie down. Do not read. Do not write. Simply allow the mind to grow still. At first, the thoughts may continue racing. That is natural. But gradually, as the minutes pass, the mind begins to settle. Imagine the surface of a lake on a windy day. Waves ripple constantly across the water. But when the wind fades, the surface becomes smooth and reflective. The mind works in much the same way. When agitation stops, clarity appears. In those quiet moments, something deeper can often be sensed, an inner harmony that usually remains hidden beneath the noise of everyday life. And as that quiet awareness grows, peace becomes more than a temporary feeling. It becomes a reservoir, a storehouse of calm experiences, peaceful thoughts, and steady attitudes that can be drawn upon whenever life becomes demanding. From that reservoir comes strength. Because a peaceful mind is not a passive mind. It is a powerful mind. It is a mind capable of meeting life's challenges without being overwhelmed by them. And when peace becomes the foundation of thought, the personality begins to operate with a quiet, steady power that can transform the way a person moves through the world. There is an interesting connection between the way we think and the way we feel physically. Most people have experienced it without always realizing what was happening. Think about the days when you wake up already convinced that you're exhausted. Almost immediately, the body seems to agree. The muscles feel heavier, the mind feels slow, and even simple tasks seem to demand more effort than usual. But on another day, when something exciting captures your attention, you can work for hours with surprising endurance. What changed? Often it was not the body. It was the mind. The human body responds very closely to the messages that come from our thinking. When the mind repeatedly tells the body that it is tired, the nerves and muscles begin accepting that suggestion. Energy drains away. But when the mind becomes interested, hopeful, or enthusiastic, the body begins to respond with renewed strength. This relationship between thought and vitality has been observed again and again. People who cultivate strong, positive attitudes often demonstrate remarkable endurance. Their energy does not come merely from physical conditioning, but from a deeper source inside their thinking. One man explained this idea in a way that stayed with me. He lived in Connecticut and possessed an extraordinary level of vigor. He was active, productive, and seemed to approach life with an endless supply of energy. When asked how he managed to maintain that level of vitality, he answered with a smile. "I go to church regularly to get my batteries recharged," he said. At first that comment might sound humorous, but the thought behind it is actually quite profound. He believed that contact with spiritual ideas restored his inner strength. Just as a battery needs to be reconnected to a source of power, he believed the human mind and body need to reconnect with the deeper source from which all life draws its energy. When people pause long enough to reflect, pray, or renew their faith, something inside them often changes. The sense of being alone in the struggle fades. Confidence returns. Hope replaces discouragement. And with that change in attitude, energy flows again. In a sense, this idea suggests that energy is not only physical, it is also spiritual and psychological. If the mind becomes discouraged, resentful, or fearful, the body often reacts by losing strength. But when the mind becomes filled with faith and purpose, vitality increases. Think about the natural world for a moment. Everywhere you look, there is movement and renewal. The sun pours energy across the earth. Plants grow. Rivers flow. Seasons change and return again. The entire universe appears to operate through a steady circulation of power. The suggestion here is that human life is connected to that same source of energy. When a person becomes consciously connected with it through faith reflection or spiritual awareness, something begins to flow through the personality that restores vitality. It is as if the original creative force that sustains the world also sustains the individual who aligns himself with it. Many of the most productive people in history seem to have understood this instinctively. Interestingly, they were not always outwardly religious in the conventional sense, but they possessed a deep inner harmony with the larger forces of life. Emotionally and psychologically, they were organized, balanced, and purposeful. That harmony allowed their energy to flow without constant interruption. In contrast, emotional conflicts have a way of draining vitality. Feelings like resentment, fear, jealousy, and guilt quietly consume mental energy. Even when we are not consciously thinking about them, they continue working in the background of the mind. Imagine carrying a heavy weight throughout the day. Eventually, fatigue would set in, not because the body lacked strength, but because the burden never allowed the muscles to rest. Negative emotions operate in much the same way. They create inner tension that slowly depletes the natural energy of the personality. This is one reason why emotional balance plays such a critical role in maintaining vitality. When a person learns to release resentment and fear, an enormous amount of energy becomes available again. One famous football coach once shared an interesting observation about this principle. He believed that a player could not reach his full physical energy if his emotions were out of balance. In fact, he went so far as to say that he did not want a man on his team who harbored hatred toward another player. His reasoning was simple. Hatred blocks energy. When a person carries resentment, a portion of his strength is constantly being consumed by that emotion. Until the feeling is released and replaced by goodwill, his performance can never reach its full potential. This insight applies far beyond the football field. In everyday life, many people unknowingly drain their vitality through unresolved emotional conflicts. But once those conflicts are healed or replaced with more constructive attitudes, the body and mind begin to function more efficiently. There is another factor that influences energy as well: tempo. Modern life often pushes people to move faster and faster. Schedules fill up, responsibilities multiply, and the pace becomes relentless. Yet when the tempo of life becomes too extreme, it begins tearing the personality apart. Energy is lost, not because there is too much work, but because the rhythm of life has become unnatural. To restore vitality, a person must rediscover a more balanced tempo. One way to understand this idea is to observe the natural world. Imagine lying down on the earth on a warm day, close enough to the ground to hear the quiet sounds around you. The wind moves gently through the trees. Insects hum in steady patterns. Leaves rustle softly. There is a rhythm to these sounds. Nothing is rushed. Nothing is chaotic. Everything moves according to a natural tempo. But when you stand in the middle of a busy city street, the rhythm disappears. The sounds become harsh, uneven, and confusing. The constant noise makes it difficult to detect any pattern at all. Human life can become like that noisy street when it loses its natural rhythm. But when people reconnect with deeper spiritual principles through reflection, prayer, or quiet thought, they begin aligning themselves with a steadier pattern of life. That alignment restores balance inside the personality. And from that balance comes renewed energy. One simple method for reconnecting with this deeper rhythm begins with relaxation. First, allow the body to relax completely. Let the muscles loosen and the breathing slow. Then imagine the mind relaxing as well, releasing tension and becoming calm. After that, direct attention toward the deeper center of the personality, the place where faith and purpose reside. From that quiet state, a simple prayer can emerge. The prayer acknowledges that the ultimate source of energy lies beyond our own limited strength. It recognizes the presence of a power greater than ourselves, a power that sustains the sun, the atoms, the life flowing through every living creature. By consciously opening the mind to that source, a person begins drawing upon a reserve of energy far greater than his own. This idea may seem abstract at first, but many people have experienced its effects in very practical ways. Consider the example of a statesman who once delivered 7 speeches in a single day. Anyone who has ever spoken publicly knows how exhausting even one speech can be. Yet after completing all 7 appearances, he still seemed full of vitality. Someone finally asked him how he managed it. His answer was revealing. "I believe completely in everything I said," he explained. That belief made all the difference. Because he was deeply committed to his message, speaking about it did not drain him. Instead, it energized him. His conviction ignited enthusiasm, and that enthusiasm fueled his endurance. In other words, he was pouring himself into something he believed mattered. And when a person gives himself fully to a meaningful purpose, fatigue often retreats. The opposite experience happens when life feels empty or dull. When people lose interest in what they are doing, energy disappears quickly. Tasks feel heavier. Motivation fades. The body slows down because the mind has lost its sense of engagement. But when a person becomes deeply absorbed in something worthwhile, something larger than personal comfort, energy returns almost automatically. There is a paradox hidden here. Many people assume that conserving energy requires doing less. Yet often the opposite is true. Real vitality grows when a person pours himself into meaningful activity with enthusiasm and conviction. When the mind is fully alive, the body responds with surprising endurance. This principle suggests that constant energy does not come from avoiding effort. It comes from aligning one's thoughts, emotions, and purpose with something that inspires commitment. When faith replaces fear, when goodwill replaces resentment, when purpose replaces boredom, the personality begins to operate at a new level of vitality. And the remarkable thing is that this energy does not feel forced. It flows naturally, like a current that has finally been allowed to move freely again. In that sense, constant energy is not merely a physical condition. It is the natural result of a mind that is aligned with faith, balanced in emotion, and engaged in meaningful work. When those elements come together, the human spirit becomes an extraordinary source of strength. There are moments in life when effort alone does not seem to be enough. A person may work hard, think carefully, plan intelligently, and still feel as though something is missing. The mind circles around the same problems, the same uncertainties, the same obstacles that refuse to move. It is in those moments that many people begin searching for a deeper source of strength, something that goes beyond their own limited resources. For centuries, people have turned to prayer for exactly that reason. But prayer, as described here, is not presented as a vague or mystical ritual. Instead, it is treated as something practical, almost like a method that helps the mind open itself to guidance and power that it cannot generate alone. The central idea is surprisingly simple. When you pray, you are dealing with one of the most tremendous forces in existence. The challenge, of course, is learning how to connect with that force in a meaningful way. Different people approach prayer differently. Some kneel quietly. Others speak aloud. Some reflect silently. The specific form is less important than the effect it produces. The purpose of prayer is to open the mind humbly to the presence and guidance of God. Any approach that helps accomplish that can become a powerful method for solving problems. One example illustrates this idea in a very practical way. Years ago, a man started a small business in New York City. In the beginning, it was hardly impressive at all. He described it himself as a little hole in the wall. There was very little space and only one employee. The operation was modest, and success was far from guaranteed. Yet something unusual began happening as the years passed. The business grew. First, they moved into a slightly larger room. Then another expansion followed. Eventually, the operation expanded into extensive quarters and became highly successful. Naturally, people began asking him what had caused such growth. His answer was not what most expected. He explained that his method of running the business involved filling that tiny office with optimistic prayers and positive thoughts. He worked hard, certainly. He treated people fairly. He insisted on honest dealing and careful effort. But alongside those practical actions, he also practiced a form of prayer that guided his decisions. He described the process using a memorable phrase. Pray it, picturize it, actualize it. That was the formula he followed. When a problem appeared in his business, he did not simply struggle with it alone. Instead, he talked about it directly in prayer, almost as if discussing it with a trusted partner. He would say things like, "Lord, what should I do about this?" or "Give me a fresh idea here." These were not elaborate or formal prayers. They were simple, honest conversations. He believed that God was present not only in church, but everywhere, in his office, in his car on the street, in the ordinary moments of daily life. Because of that belief, he approached each problem as if he were working together with a partner whose wisdom exceeded his own. But prayer was only the first step. The second step involved something equally important: visualization. He believed that the mind has a powerful tendency to move toward the images it holds most clearly. If a person continually imagines failure, fear begins shaping behavior until failure becomes likely. But if the mind pictures success, if it holds a clear image of the desired outcome, that picture begins influencing decisions and actions. So after praying about a problem, he would create a mental picture of the best possible solution. He would imagine the situation resolving itself successfully. He did not treat the picture as a fantasy. Instead, he held it firmly while continuing to work hard and act intelligently. In his words, the picture would eventually actualize itself. This did not mean success appeared magically without effort. Rather, the mental image guided his thinking and actions until the solution gradually took shape in real life. Over time, he became convinced that this combination of prayer, visualization, and action released creative power within the mind. And the results spoke for themselves. Many other people began experimenting with the same approach. Some of the stories that followed were remarkable. One particularly striking example involved a woman facing the possible collapse of her marriage. For years, her relationship with her husband had been happy and close. But gradually, without either of them fully realizing it, their lives began drifting apart. She became absorbed in social activities. He became increasingly consumed by his work. Little by little, the companionship that once connected them faded. Then one day, she discovered that her husband had developed an interest in another woman. The shock of that discovery overwhelmed her. Fear, anger, and panic surged through her mind. She felt as though everything she valued might be slipping away. In her distress, she sought help from a minister. Instead of offering complicated advice, he introduced her to the same principle of prayer and visualization. He suggested that she begin praying about the situation regularly, but he also asked her to do something else to form a clear mental picture of the marriage as it once had been. He encouraged her to visualize her husband as the good man she knew him to be, to picture the companionship they had once enjoyed, to imagine the harmony of their earlier years returning again. At first, this seemed difficult. The immediate circumstances looked discouraging. The husband soon told her plainly that he wanted a divorce. But instead of responding with anger or desperation, she surprised him. Calmly, she said that if he truly wanted a divorce, she would not prevent it. However, she suggested waiting 90 days before making a final decision. He agreed, somewhat puzzled by her composure. During those 90 days, something unusual happened. Each evening after he left the house, she remained at home and practiced the method she had been taught. She prayed about the situation. Then she pictured him sitting in his old chair in the living room, just as he had done years earlier. She imagined the small routines they once shared. She even pictured them doing ordinary things together, like washing dishes side by side or playing golf the way they used to. Night after night, she held those images in her mind. There was no hysteria now, no desperate pleading, only steady faith that the relationship could be restored. Gradually, subtle changes began appearing. Some evenings he came home earlier. Occasionally, he sat quietly in his familiar chair. Other nights he still went out, but the pattern slowly shifted. More evenings were spent at home. More conversation returned. Then one Saturday afternoon, he casually asked if she would like to play a round of golf with him. The days that followed felt surprisingly normal, almost like the earlier years of their marriage. Finally, the 90th day arrived. That evening, she mentioned the agreement they had made. "Do you realize," she said quietly, "that today is the 90th day?" He looked puzzled. The 90th day of what, he asked. She reminded him of their arrangement about the divorce decision. For a moment he stared at her, then slowly turned a page of the newspaper he was reading. "Don't be silly," he said casually. "I couldn't get along without you." Just like that, the crisis had passed. Stories like this might seem difficult to explain purely through logic, but they illustrate something powerful about the way the human mind works. When prayer clears fear from the mind and replaces it with faith. When visualization fills the imagination with constructive images rather than destructive ones. And when action continues steadily in harmony with those beliefs. A remarkable process often begins unfolding. Creative power emerges, new ideas appear, relationships shift, solutions develop where none seemed possible before. The formula itself remains straightforward. First, bring the problem honestly into prayer. Speak about it openly as you would to a trusted partner. Second, create a clear mental picture of the best outcome, one that reflects wisdom, harmony, and success. Third, act faithfully while holding that picture in mind. Over time, the mind, guided by faith and focused intention, begins turning that picture into reality. And again, people have discovered something surprising. When they begin using this method sincerely, when prayer, imagination, and action work together, the results can be astonishing. One day during a television program, an elderly man appeared as a guest. There was nothing especially dramatic about his presence at first. He wasn't delivering a rehearsed speech or presenting some complicated philosophy. In fact, the charm of the moment came from the exact opposite. Everything he said seemed to come naturally, almost playfully, as though happiness simply bubbled out of him without effort. The audience loved him. His remarks were simple, even naive at times, but there was something refreshing about the way he spoke. Each comment carried a kind of quiet wisdom wrapped in humor. Eventually, the host, clearly intrigued by the man's cheerful spirit, asked the question everyone was thinking. "You seem unusually happy," he said. "What's your secret?" The old man smiled. "I don't have any great secret," he replied. "It's just as plain as the nose on your face." He paused a moment, as if the answer were obvious. "When I wake up in the morning," he continued, "I have two choices. I can be happy or unhappy, and I simply choose to be happy." At first, hearing the statement almost sounds too simple. Some might even dismiss it as unrealistic. After all, life presents difficulties. Problems arise. Circumstances change in ways we cannot control. But the deeper truth behind the old man's remark has been echoed by thoughtful observers throughout history. Abraham Lincoln once expressed a similar idea when he said that people are about as happy as they make up their minds to be. The statement does not mean that suffering never exists. Certainly it does. Hardships and losses are real. But within the conditions of life, there remains a powerful element that belongs entirely to the individual, the direction of his thinking. And that direction has enormous influence over whether a person experiences life as something hopeful or discouraging. Consider how easily the mind can drift toward unhappiness if we allow it. A person can wake in the morning already rehearsing thoughts of dissatisfaction. Perhaps he begins by reminding himself that the weather is unpleasant, that work will be difficult, that people around him are irritating, that circumstances never seem to improve. If those thoughts continue throughout the day, unhappiness becomes almost inevitable. The mind has created the atmosphere in which the person lives. But suppose the same day begins with a different pattern of thought. Instead of repeating complaints, the mind affirms that life still contains opportunity, that today holds possibilities, that even with challenges, there are reasons to be grateful. The difference between those two mental patterns may seem subtle at first, yet over time it becomes profound. Thoughts gradually shape attitudes, attitudes shape actions, and actions shape the entire experience of life. In that sense, happiness is not merely something that happens to a person. It is something that can be cultivated deliberately. Many people unknowingly manufacture their own unhappiness through habitual patterns of thinking. They dwell on disappointments, magnify problems, and repeat discouraging ideas until those ideas begin defining their entire outlook. Of course, not all unhappiness is self-created. External conditions, economic hardships, personal losses, social struggles can certainly influence how people feel. Yet even within those circumstances, the human mind still possesses the remarkable ability to interpret events in different ways. Out of the raw ingredients of life, we often create either happiness or misery, depending on the thoughts we choose to emphasize. That is why the discipline of thought becomes so important. If happiness depends largely on our thinking, then learning to guide those thoughts becomes one of the most practical skills a person can develop. An interesting example of this principle involved a businessman who had fallen into a deeply discouraged state of mind. His problem was not lack of opportunity or intelligence. Instead, he had developed a pattern of gloomy thinking that colored everything he experienced. No matter what situation arose, his thoughts tended to focus on the negative side. He expected disappointment. He anticipated failure. Gradually, his entire personality had begun reflecting that outlook. When someone suggested that his unhappiness might be caused by these repeated thought patterns, he reacted skeptically. But curiosity eventually led him to try an experiment. He was given a small booklet containing 40 constructive ideas designed to encourage health, confidence, and happiness. The instructions were simple. Carry the booklet with you. Each day select one thought, read it carefully, memorize it if possible, then visualize that idea moving through the mind like a healing influence. The process would continue for 40 days. At first, the businessman doubted anything so simple could make a difference. Yet he followed the suggestion. Day after day, he deliberately introduced positive ideas into his thinking. Instead of allowing negative thoughts to dominate, he replaced them with statements of faith and encouragement. After several weeks, something remarkable happened. He called enthusiastically to report the results. "This really works," he said. "I've snapped out of it." The shift had not come from external changes. His circumstances were largely the same. What had changed was the mental atmosphere through which he viewed those circumstances. Once the mind begins feeding on constructive ideas, discouragement gradually loses its hold. The practice can even begin with something as simple as the way we start each morning. Imagine waking up and immediately affirming a positive statement about the day ahead. One example drawn from Scripture suggests saying aloud, "This is the day which the Lord hath made. We will rejoice and be glad in it." When spoken with sincerity, the words do more than express gratitude. They set the emotional tone for the hours that follow. The mind begins the day looking for reasons to rejoice, rather than reasons to complain. Additional affirmations can reinforce the same pattern. While getting dressed or preparing breakfast, a person might quietly repeat thoughts like these: "I believe I can handle whatever problems arise today. I feel strong in mind and body. It is good to be alive. I am grateful for what I have received and for what lies ahead." These statements may seem small, yet they gradually shape the expectations with which we approach the day. And expectation plays an extraordinary role in determining outcomes. The human mind has a curious tendency to move toward what it consistently anticipates. If a person expects failure, his behavior often reflects hesitation and doubt, which increases the likelihood of failure. But if he expects success, confidence begins influencing his actions in ways that encourage better results. This principle becomes especially vivid in a story involving a trapeze instructor and one of his nervous students. The instructor had been teaching the class how to perform on the high trapeze. After explaining the technique, he asked each student to demonstrate the move. One young man stepped forward and looked up at the bar suspended high above the ground. Suddenly, fear overwhelmed him. His imagination filled with the picture of falling. His muscles tightened. He froze completely. "I can't do it," he said quietly. The instructor placed a reassuring arm around his shoulders. "Yes, you can," he said, "and I'll tell you how." Then he offered advice that carried meaning far beyond the trapeze. "Throw your heart over the bar," he said, "and your body will follow." The phrase may sound poetic, but it expresses a powerful psychological truth. When the mind commits fully to a goal, when the heart reaches for it with determination, the rest of the personality begins aligning itself to achieve that goal. In other words, the direction of expectation guides the direction of action. If the student continued picturing himself falling, fear would dominate his movements. But if he fixed his mind on the successful swing the moment of reaching the bar, his body would naturally respond with the coordination needed to accomplish it. The same principle applies to many areas of life. Obstacles appear in every person's path. There are always bars to clear barriers of circumstance, uncertainty, or doubt. But when a person throws his heart over that bar, when he fills his mind with the expectation of overcoming it, something remarkable begins to happen. Confidence rises, effort becomes focused, and the body follows the direction set by the mind. This idea leads to an important habit: expecting the best rather than the worst. Expectation does not mean ignoring reality. It does not mean pretending difficulties do not exist. Instead, it means approaching those difficulties with the conviction that solutions are possible. When a person cultivates that attitude, the mind begins searching for opportunities rather than limitations. Gradually, life starts responding in surprising ways. The opportunities that once seemed distant begin moving closer. And the person who expected the best often finds himself achieving far more than he once believed possible. Happiness, confidence, and success begin from the same quiet source: the thoughts we allow to guide our lives each day. At some point in life, everyone faces obstacles that seem almost impossible to overcome. Problems appear suddenly. Circumstances become complicated. Plans fall apart. And in those moments, a quiet but powerful question begins forming in the mind. Is defeat inevitable, or is there still a way forward? Some people, when confronted with difficulty, immediately begin rehearsing the language of defeat. They say things like, "I don't think I can do this," or "This problem is too big," or "It probably won't work anyway." At first, those sentences may seem harmless, just casual remarks spoken in passing. But over time, those little statements accumulate. They shape the atmosphere of the mind. And that atmosphere can quietly determine the outcome long before the struggle is finished. One wise and thoughtful man once described his approach to difficulty in a way that captures a very different mindset. When asked how he managed to get through life's challenges, he answered with simple honesty. First, he said, "I try to go around the trouble. If I can't go around it, I try to get under it. If I can't get under it, I try to go over it. And if I can't go over it, then I just plow right through it." Then he added something that made the statement even more powerful. "God and I plow right through it." That philosophy contains a deep refusal to accept defeat. It recognizes that difficulties are real, but it refuses to treat them as final. Instead, it approaches each problem with determination, creativity, and faith that some path forward will eventually appear. But maintaining that kind of mindset requires more than occasional optimism. It requires changing the patterns of thought and speech that quietly shape the mind. One of the most important discoveries in this process involves something that might seem almost trivial at first. It concerns the small negative expressions people use every day. These expressions are easy to overlook because they appear so minor. Someone might say, "I'm afraid I'll be late," or "I don't think I can manage that," or "Something will probably go wrong." Each remark seems harmless on its own. Yet when those phrases are repeated again and again, they gradually condition the mind to expect trouble. Over time, the mind begins believing what it hears most often. When this realization first became clear, it led to an interesting personal experiment. The speaker began paying close attention to his own conversation throughout the day. What he discovered surprised him. He was using negative expressions constantly. Not dramatic ones, just small remarks scattered through ordinary conversations. But those small remarks formed a steady stream of doubt and hesitation. Once he became aware of it, he decided to do something about it. He made a deliberate effort to eliminate those little negatives from his speech. Whenever he noticed himself about to say something discouraging, he stopped and replaced it with a constructive statement instead. For example, instead of saying, "I wonder if I'll have a flat tire," he would say, "This trip will go well." Instead of, "I don't think I can do that," he would say, "I'll find a way to handle it." The change might seem subtle, but its effect on the mind was significant, because thoughts expressed aloud tend to reinforce themselves. The more often we hear ourselves speak positively, the more naturally the mind begins adopting that attitude. A useful comparison appeared once on a roadside billboard advertising motor oil. The slogan read, "A clean engine always delivers power." The same idea applies to the mind. A mind clogged with negative thoughts cannot produce its full strength. But when those thoughts are flushed out and replaced with constructive ones, the mind begins functioning with much greater efficiency. In a sense, it becomes a clean mental engine. This process of eliminating negative patterns does more than improve mood. It directly influences how we handle obstacles. Because most obstacles, at least in part, exist in the mind. Now, that statement may sound strange. Many people immediately respond by saying, "My problems are not imaginary. They are real." And of course, many difficulties are indeed real. But the crucial point lies in how we interpret them. Two people may face the same challenge and react in completely different ways. One sees the situation as overwhelming. The other sees it as a puzzle that can be solved. The difference lies in mental attitude. A story from the golf course illustrates this idea in an unexpected way. One afternoon, a golfer found himself in a difficult position during a game. His ball had landed deep in the rough, tall grass that surrounded the fairway. Anyone who plays golf knows how frustrating that situation can be. The grass grabs the club, interferes with the swing, and makes it much harder to control the shot. When the golfer walked up to his ball, he immediately reacted with discouragement. "Just look at that," he said. "I'm really in the rough this time. It's going to be almost impossible to get out of here." The friend playing with him listened with a quiet smile. "Didn't I read somewhere that you believe in positive thinking?" he asked. The golfer laughed a little sheepishly and admitted that he did indeed talk about such ideas. "Well," his friend said thoughtfully, "why don't we examine the situation a little more closely?" Then he suggested something rather unusual. "Let's get down on our hands and knees and look at that ball." So the two men knelt down beside the patch of grass and studied the position carefully. "Notice something," the friend said. "The ball itself is sitting almost at the same height it would be if it were lying on the fairway. The only difference is that there's about 6 inches of grass above it." He reached down and pulled out a blade of grass. "Here," he said, "chew this." The golfer looked puzzled but did as he was told. "It's pretty tender," he admitted. "Exactly," the friend replied. "Your iron will cut through that grass easily if you swing properly." Then he offered a piece of advice that the golfer never forgot. "The rough," he said, "is mostly mental." What he meant was that the golfer had already convinced himself the shot would be difficult. That belief created tension in his muscles and hesitation in his swing. But if he approached the shot with confidence, if he visualized lifting the ball cleanly out of the grass, his body would respond differently. The mind would transfer rhythm and power to the muscles. The swing would become smoother, and the obstacle would no longer seem so overwhelming. With that encouragement, the golfer relaxed. He focused on the ball, pictured the shot clearly, and made the swing. The ball rose beautifully from the rough and landed near the green. The moment produced a powerful realization. What had seemed like a major obstacle only minutes earlier had been largely created by his own thinking. Once the mental barrier disappeared, the physical challenge became manageable. That lesson extends far beyond the golf course. In everyday life, people often encounter situations that appear intimidating at first glance. The mind immediately labels the situation as difficult, impossible, or hopeless. Once that label settles in, discouragement follows. But when a person changes the internal conversation, when he replaces defeatist thoughts with constructive ones, something remarkable happens. Confidence returns, creativity awakens, and solutions begin appearing where none seemed visible before. The obstacles themselves may still exist, but they no longer carry the same power to intimidate. This is why attitude plays such a decisive role in success or failure. A person who expects defeat approaches challenges cautiously, often holding back effort. A person who refuses to believe in defeat approaches the same challenges with determination and energy. The difference in results can be extraordinary. In truth, many difficulties in life contain possibilities hidden within them. They invite growth, creativity, and resilience. But those possibilities reveal themselves only to the person who believes they can be discovered. That belief begins with something very small: the words we choose, the thoughts we repeat, the attitude we carry into each situation. When negative habits of speech and thinking are replaced with constructive ones, the mind gradually adopts a new orientation. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" it begins asking, "How can this be solved?" Instead of concluding, "I can't," it begins considering, maybe I can. And in that quiet shift from defeat to determination lies the beginning of remarkable change. Worry has a way of creeping into the mind so quietly that many people begin to think it's simply part of who they are. They say things like, "I've always been a worrier," as if worry were a permanent feature of their personality, something built into them from the beginning. But that isn't really true. Worry is not something we are born with. It is something we learn. And anything that has been learned can also be unlearned. When we reduce worry to its simplest definition, it becomes easier to understand. Worry is essentially a mental habit, a repeated pattern of anxious thinking that the mind has practiced so often it begins to feel automatic. Like any habit, it strengthens through repetition. The more frequently a person rehearses anxious thoughts, the more natural those thoughts begin to feel. But the encouraging part of this realization is that habits can be changed. Just as the mind has learned to worry, it can learn to think in new ways. One of the most effective methods for breaking the worry habit begins with something very simple: emptying the mind of anxious thoughts on a regular basis. This practice becomes especially important at the end of the day. Think about the last few minutes before sleep. Those moments hold a unique power over the mind. As the body begins to relax, the mind becomes unusually receptive to suggestion. The final thoughts of the day often settle deeply into the subconscious and remain active throughout the night. If those last thoughts are filled with fear or anxiety, the mind continues turning them over during sleep. Worries sink deeper into the subconscious and become more difficult to remove the next day. But if the mind is cleared of those worries before sleep, something very different happens. The night becomes a time of restoration instead of agitation. So the first step is learning to drain the mind of anxiety. Imagine the mind as a basin filled with troubled thoughts. Instead of allowing the basin to overflow, you open the drain and allow the contents to flow away. Through the power of imagination, a person can actually visualize worries leaving the mind in this way. As those thoughts are released, it helps to repeat a simple affirmation slowly and deliberately. With God's help, I am now emptying my mind of all anxiety, all fear, all sense of insecurity. Repeating these words several times while imagining the mind becoming clear creates a powerful suggestion to the subconscious. Then a second statement follows. I believe my mind is now emptied of all anxiety, all fear, all sense of insecurity. Again, the words are repeated, slowly reinforcing the mental picture of a calm and open mind. Afterward, the person offers a brief prayer of gratitude for this release from fear and allows sleep to come naturally. Practicing this process faithfully begins changing the habit of worry. But emptying the mind is only the first part of the method. Nature abhors a vacuum, and the human mind is no exception. If negative thoughts are removed but nothing replaces them, the old worries eventually return. So once the mind has been cleared of anxiety, it must be filled again, this time with thoughts of faith, hope, courage, and confidence. Words have enormous influence over our thinking, especially when spoken aloud. Repeating affirmations during the day strengthens the new mental pattern we are trying to build. A person might say quietly, God is now filling my mind with courage and peace. Or God is guiding me toward the right decisions. Or God will see me through whatever situation I face. Statements like these may feel unfamiliar at first, especially for someone accustomed to thinking negatively. But repetition gradually changes the direction of the mind. Instead of returning automatically to worry, the mind begins turning toward faith. And faith has a remarkable ability to crowd fear out of the mental space it once occupied. Fear is powerful, but it has one great rival: faith. When the mind becomes saturated with faith-filled thoughts, fear begins losing its foothold. There simply isn't room for both at the same time. Gradually, the anxious patterns that once seemed unavoidable begin dissolving. A businessman once demonstrated this principle in a particularly creative way. He had been an intense worrier for many years. His mind constantly replayed the events of the day, especially the decisions he had made. Long after leaving the office, he would continue wondering whether he had said the right thing or taken the correct action. Every choice became a source of doubt. Over time, this habit began affecting his health. His nerves grew strained, his sleep became restless, and the weight of constant worry followed him everywhere. Finally, he decided to do something about it. Each evening before leaving his office, he created a small ritual that symbolized the end of the day. On the wall hung a calendar. When the workday was finished, he would reach up and tear off that day's page. Then he would roll the page into a small ball and drop it into the wastebasket. But the physical action was only part of the process. As he threw the paper away, he spoke a quiet prayer. "Lord," he would say, "you gave me this day. I did the best I could with it, and you helped me. I made some mistakes. That was when I didn't follow your guidance, and I'm sorry about that. But there were successes too, and I'm grateful for your help. Now the day is over. Mistakes and successes alike, I give it back to you." With that simple prayer, the day was finished. He no longer carried it home in his mind. The act of tearing off the calendar page symbolized something powerful. The past had been released. The worries attached to it no longer had authority over his thoughts. Night after night, he repeated the ritual. Gradually, the heavy burden of worry lifted from his mind. The constant reviewing of past decisions stopped dominating his thoughts. Instead of being trapped by yesterday's anxieties, he began facing each new day with a clearer mind. This method illustrates an important truth. Many people allow worry to accumulate day after day like dust gathering in a room that is never cleaned. Without regular effort to release those worries, they continue piling up until the mind becomes cluttered and exhausted. But when a person consciously empties the mind and returns those concerns to God, the burden becomes lighter. The future no longer feels so threatening. Another powerful factor in overcoming worry involves the people we choose to surround ourselves with. Human attitudes are contagious. Spend enough time around people who constantly complain, criticize, or predict disaster, and their outlook gradually begins influencing your own thinking. But the opposite is also true. When we associate with individuals who approach life with hope, confidence, and faith, their mental atmosphere begins lifting our own. Hopeful people remind us that difficulties can be faced with courage. They reinforce the belief that problems have solutions. Their influence strengthens the habit of calm thinking. And as that habit grows, the mind gradually loses its attraction to worry. Breaking the worry habit does not happen overnight. Like any deeply rooted pattern, it requires practice and patience. But the process follows a clear path. First, recognize that worry is a habit, not an unavoidable destiny. Second, empty the mind of anxious thoughts regularly, especially before sleep. Third, fill that cleared space with affirmations of faith and confidence. Fourth, release each day's burdens instead of carrying them endlessly into the future. And finally, cultivate friendships with people whose attitudes reinforce hope rather than fear. As these practices become part of daily life, something remarkable begins happening. The mind grows quieter, the constant pressure of anxiety fades, and the person who once felt trapped in the cycle of worry discovers that a calmer, stronger way of thinking has taken its place. In the end, the quiet truth running through all of this is simple. The thoughts we nurture eventually shape the life we experience. Confidence grows when we choose belief over doubt. Peace deepens when we replace worry with faith. Energy returns when purpose and hope fill the mind. None of these changes happen all at once, but each small shift in thinking opens the door to a stronger, steadier life. And the journey of discovering that inner strength is one worth continuing.